The room was charged before a single word left Mitt Romney's mouth. He leaned forward, his voice sharpened with that familiar tone of authority that comes not just from years in politics, but from the certainty of someone who had never truly been questioned. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his words cutting through the air. "With all due respect, many of us wonder if you have the experience, the gravitas, the preparation for these responsibilities. Frankly, it seems you're in over your head." Gasps rippled quietly, barely audible but undeniable. Some shifted in their seats, eager for drama. Others tightened their jaws as if bracing for impact. Romney reclined slightly, satisfied with the weight of his question, confident the blow had landed. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush to defend herself or stumble over rehearsed talking points. Instead, she sat still, her gaze steady, her lips pressed in thoughtful silence. It was the kind of silence that said more than words ever could, the kind that made listeners lean forward, waiting, uncomfortable, desperate to know what came next. The contrast between them was cinematic. Romney, the polished veteran, basked in his moment, his expression a mask of self-assured triumph. Crockett, the newcomer in his eyes, seemed almost serene, as though the attack revealed more about him than it did about her. And then the narration, almost like a whisper echoing in the room, asked the question every viewer at home would feel in their gut. What happens when arrogance collides with truth, and calm confidence answers the loudest voice in the room? For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The chamber's air grew heavy, the audience caught between the weight of Romney's dismissal and the quiet, steady poise of the woman he sought to diminish. Crockett still hadn't spoken, but her silence was a presence all its own, measured, deliberate, and disarming. Romney shifted, perhaps sensing that silence was no surrender. His smile. For Mitt Romney, the moment was supposed to be simple. A senior statesman, a two-time presidential contender, a man whose name had been etched into the granite walls of establishment politics for decades, questioning the credentials of a younger, less entrenched colleague should have been effortless. His resume gleamed: governor, senator, party elder. Every title spoke to decades of accumulated power. To him, experience meant years in marble corridors, measured in speeches delivered and hands shaken. But across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose rise was not scripted by privilege or inherited power. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not by the rules Romney and his peers had written for generations. Yet there she was, carrying not the sheen of elite pedigree but the scars of courtroom battles, the fire of grassroots organizing, and the resilience of someone who had fought every inch for her place at the table. This clash was not just another exchange. It was the embodiment of a deeper struggle in American politics, the collision between establishment entitlement and emerging authenticity. Romney's words carried more than personal doubt. They echoed the old gatekeeping tradition, the whispered refrain that certain people didn't belong, that voices from the margins lacked the gravitas to lead. And in that moment, every viewer knew this was larger than Crockett. It was about who gets to be heard, who gets to be seen, and who gets to define the very meaning of leadership. For Crockett, the stakes were enormous. A stumble here would feed into the caricatures. Too inexperienced, too brash, too unprepared. It wasn't just her reputation on trial, but the legitimacy of countless Americans who saw themselves in her. Immigrants' children, working families, women of color who had always been told they were reaching too high, daring too much. To withstand Romney's challenge meant more than defending her name. It meant defending theirs. And for Romney, the risks. To understand why Mitt Romney's question carried such weight, you have to understand the man himself. For decades, Romney has been the polished face of American establishment politics. He has walked the marble floors of power with the certainty of someone born into them, his path smoothed by privilege, his name synonymous with wealth and lineage. A governor of Massachusetts, a presidential nominee, and later a senator from Utah, his career has been defined by titles that demand respect. When Romney speaks, people expect gravitas, because his resume has been curated to command it. And yet, Behind that resume lies a portrait of contradictions. Romney has at times been praised for his courage, breaking with his party when conscience demanded, standing against excesses that others embraced. For moments like those, he was hailed as a defender of principle, a rare figure willing to risk political cost for what he believed was right. But those flashes of independence never erased another truth. To many, Romney remained the embodiment of privilege, a man who could afford moral risks precisely because he would never be excluded from the halls of power. His very presence in that chamber symbolized the old guard, the men who measured worth by pedigree, by how closely one mirrored the traditional image of authority, tall, polished, commanding, with the weight of generational advantage. In Romney's world, experience was a currency passed down like inheritance, valuable not because of service rendered, but because of where and with whom it had been earned. To him, Crockett was an outsider, someone who didn't fit the mold, someone whose sharp edges and grassroots fire could be dismissed as inexperience rather than recognized as strength. It wasn't the first time Romney had played examiner, placing himself in the seat of judgment. Over his career, he had cast doubt on rivals, questioning whether they were serious enough, stable enough, dignified enough for the offices they sought. Romney wasn't finished. The question he had lobbed wasn't meant to hang alone. It was bait, and he pressed it further, his voice tightening with each sentence. "This chamber is not a classroom for amateurs," he declared, gesturing with a dismissive sweep of his hand. "It requires discipline, knowledge, and experience that you, Congresswoman, simply have not demonstrated. Do you even realize the gravity of the responsibilities placed before you?" The words echoed in the chamber like a lecture. His tone dripped with condescension, each phrase crafted to frame Crockett not as an equal, but as a student being scolded by a headmaster. He leaned back in his chair with the smug assurance of a man who believed he had seized control of the moment. Crockett didn't flinch. Her hands rested calmly on the desk before her, shoulders squared but relaxed, her gaze steady. She let his words linger in the air, refusing to rush into a defensive scramble. Where Romney's body language broadcast superiority, chin raised, lips curled in faint disdain, hers projected control. She was still, composed, grounded, as if drawing power from the very act of restraint. Romney pressed harder, mistaking her silence for weakness. "This isn't about passion," he continued, his voice rising just slightly. "It's about credibility. Without a foundation of real, substantive experience, how can anyone here take your words seriously?" He paused, scanning the chamber, searching for nods of agreement. A few colleagues shifted uncomfortably, but the silence from others was telling. Still, Crockett waited. Her composure was unsettling, even disarming. The tension in the room was no longer just about Romney's question. It was about Crockett's refusal to play the role he had assigned her. Where he wanted a flustered rebuttal, he found an immovable calm. The balance of power was beginning to shift, though few recognized it yet. Romney leaned forward again, narrowing his eyes. "Tell us," he demanded, his voice now. The silence hung heavy. Romney's finger had stopped tapping, his last words still echoing. "What qualifies you?" All eyes shifted to Jasmine Crockett. For long seconds, she remained still, her hands folded, her posture unbroken. Then, with the calm precision of someone who had weathered storms far greater than a senator's sneer, she began. "Senator Romney," she said evenly, her voice low but steady, every syllable measured. The chamber quieted instantly. "You ask what qualifies me. You ask if I've lived enough, studied enough, led enough." She let the words hang, a pause that stretched just long enough to sharpen anticipation. "Let me answer you." Her tone was deliberate, almost surgical. "When you speak of experience, you count years spent in office, titles held, rooms where decisions were made. That's one kind of experience, yes. But let me tell you about another." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Romney's. "I've stood in courtrooms where my client's life depended on every word I spoke. No cameras, no headlines, just the weight of justice against the odds of a system rigged against them." A ripple moved through the chamber. Crockett continued, her voice rising just enough to carry conviction. I've sat across from mothers who had no idea how they'd put food on the table, listening to them tell me stories that would break your heart, stories no resume line could ever capture. I didn't read about struggle in a briefing paper. I lived it through the people I serve. Romney shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering. Crockett pressed forward. You speak of gravitas, she said, the word sharp, cutting. Let me tell you what gives weight to leadership. It's not the polished speeches delivered to donors, or the titles that pass down like heirlooms. It's standing up when you are told to sit down. It's speaking when you are told to be quiet. It's fighting for people who will never have the power to repay you, but who trust you to fight anyway. A few AUD.